On next week's test, you will not have a problem like this. You will not be given one problem and asked, do everything. Okay, so that's my warning right now, just for the yesterday's notes and today's notes. On next week's test, you're going to be given single questions where you would have to do a part of today's notes. So I'll go into more detail about that when we finish this problem. So we're going to do everything one last time before we start working on the practice test and everything else. So here's our problem. 12x parentheses x plus 1 parentheses equals -3. First and foremost, to do everything quadratic, speaking of Friday, you always have to make sure it's equal to 0. Okay, so we always need to equal 0. We started talking about that on Friday. So how are we going to get this equal to 0? Let's distribute. 12x squared plus 12x equals -3. And then we'll add the 3, we'll send the 3 over this way, and we'll get 12x squared plus 12x plus 3 equals 0, and we're good when we get there. Alright, so first and foremost, if it's equal to 0 already, you don't have to do that. If it's not equal to 0, you have to do that. Okay, so that's the first checkpoint that you need to verify. Now, to do everything quadratic, okay, so if you need to, let's say you need to find the vertex form, max min, domain range, etc. You have to find all those pieces of information. You have to use the little formula -b over 2a. Okay? You have to. It's what we were talking about yesterday. -b over 2a answers almost everything you need to find in a problem. However, unfortunately, -b over 2a doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't find the x-intercepts of the problem. It doesn't find, after Thanksgiving break, not tomorrow, not next week, but after Thanksgiving break, I'm going to mention something about what's called the roots of the problem. Okay, so this is after Thanksgiving break. We're going to start talking about the roots. Okay, but not on the test this week, but I'm just giving you something for the future. If you need to find these 3 things, actually all 3 of these things are telling you to find the same thing, so it's really telling you to find one thing. Do not use -b over 2a. Use the other formula, b squared minus 4ac. Once you're there, you just work each formula out and you get your answers. So we first must identify A, B, and C. So A is 12. B is 12. And C is 3. And we're going to take those numbers, plug them in, and see where we go. So, negative B is 12 over 2 times the A number, and the A number is also 12. That just coincidentally happens sometimes. And so we're going to get negative 12 over 24, which is going to reduce to negative half, or negative 0.5. Side note, do not ever round this number. Never round. Like if you get an ugly decimal and you round the decimal, you're done. You can't do that. Okay, you either have to use the fraction or a clean decimal. You cannot round that position, or else you'll get very little to no credit. Okay, so don't make that mistake, please. All right, so where do we go from here? We plug it in. Okay, so let's go ahead. That's going to start setting our vertex up. Negative 0.5 comma something time to plug in. Okay, time to plug in. So let's go ahead and plug that number in. Y equals 12. Plug it in here into the squared, plus 12. Plug it in here without the squared, plus 3. And we're going to plug in negative 0.5 into both positions. Get your calculator out. Next week, when you're taking your test, before you walk in and sit down, I would have your ID card out, and I would immediately borrow a calculator if you forgot yours, because you're going to need it all over the test. Okay, just like this. Plug in the first one into the calculator, and you are going to get 12, 0.25 plus 12 times negative 0.5 plus 3. Plug those items into your calculator, and you're going to get 3 plus, excuse me, it's no longer plus, it's now going to be a minus 6, because, you know, multiplying a 12 times a negative half is going to be minus 6 plus 3. And that is going to equal 0. So, what do we find? Our work is done here. On the left side, our work is done. Now we can write answers. Whenever you do your work, you don't have to draw that line. I just like to draw that line in our notes to say our work is that quick and that short. And then now it's answer time. So you don't have to do it, but I like to do it just for the notes, just to separate work from answers. So what's our official vertex answer here? Negative half comma 0. What's our axis answer? It's always the x number, but you'll get no credit unless you write x equals. Okay, we reviewed that on the function catalogs. I talked about that last week. Now, because of this, I want to ask you sort of like a side question. Does this problem open up, or is it going to open down? Is it going to have a min, or is it going to have a max? If we go back to the very beginning, look at A. You see how A was positive 12 for 12x squared? When it's positive, is that telling us normal or upside down? That's going to tell us our problem is normal. It is not upside down. So up here, the A is the giveaway on the direction, if it's upside down or not. That just is a shout out to when we were doing transformations QR8 early last week. That was assignment 3.1. Okay, that move right there was assignment 3.1. So because of that, when I ask for the max or the min answer, we automatically know, based on which direction it's going, it's not going to be a max. It has to be a min. And the min is going to be y equals the other number from the vertex. Okay, what is our vertex form quadratic answer? Our vertex form quadratic answer is going to be y equals a parentheses squared. Now, where do we get a for the first position? Again, you go back up to the top, and if you remember that the a was 12, so you're going to take that and you're going to steal it, and you're going to put 12 right there. And then you have to determine what's going to go inside and what's going to go outside. So you look at your vertex. Since the vertex is at -½ comma 0, is this going left or is it going right? -½ means it's going left if you were to plot it. Okay, it would be left a half. So that means this position has to be a left, and the only way to write that is x plus 0.5. And it's not going up or down. Okay, right here the plus 0, it's not going up or down, so I'm just going to put a plus 0, but that's optional. You don't have to put it. It's not required since it's a 0, but I like to put it just for habit purposes. Domain. For problems like quadratics, they're always going to be all real numbers and the range. The range is a little tricky. Since we have a min and the lowest number starts at 0, and if you look at the direction, it only goes up. Okay, let me zoom in here so you can see all this. Since we have a min, it's y equals 0, and the direction only goes upward. What does our range have to be? What do our y's have to be? They have to be y is greater than or equal to 0. And so the range is sort of always connected to the max and the min in the direction of whether or not it's up or down. Okay, so I'm going to do that. And I'm also going to circle it with the pink highlighter because it's connected to both of those. All right, so negative b over 2a gives us a ton of answers. But it doesn't tell us to solve or any of these other two words. We have to go to the other formula. So we're almost done. By the way, again, one more time, next week's test, you will not have to do this entire process on one problem. On next week's test, one question will be, what's the vertex of this problem? And then that's it. You do the vertex and you stop. On next week's test, one question will be, change this problem into vertex form. You do the work, you get your vertex form answer, and you stop. Okay? On next week's test, you'll get a question that says, solve these two problems. Okay? You do b squared minus 4ac for both problems, you solve and you stop. Okay? So next week's test is not going to be one problem where you have to do the whole thing. So don't be too scared about that in the sense it'll just be individual pieces. So this one problem could be 4 different questions on next week's test, is what I'm trying to say. Okay? All right, solve. X-intercepts, roots. Let's use the other formula, b squared minus 4ac. If you look at it, b was 12, so that makes b squared become 144 minus, and then 4ac. What is 4 times a is 12 times 3? Some of you might be able to do it mentally, but I would not risk it. 4 times 12 times 3 is also 144. Kind of odd. But on Friday last week, sometimes we did get situations where we got a 0. And if it's a 0, if the discriminant, this is called the discriminant, by the way, if the discriminant gives you a 0, what does that 0 tell us? That 0 tells us there's going to be one real solution. Right now I'm reviewing assignment 3.3. And one real solution means there's going to be one x-intercept. Now you can see why solving and x-intercepts mean the same thing. And that 0 is going to tell us we have the option to use quadratic formula, or we have the option to do factoring. But honestly, because we've done all the work that we've done so far, I will personally always choose quadratic formula, but if you want to try to give factoring a shot, you can. Okay, but because I've done the work I've done, quadratic formula is quicker than factoring. Okay, factoring might be considered easier, but quadratic formula is less work as of right now. All right, so I'm going to do quad formula. I'm not really going to do some factoring here. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So you have to have that thing memorized. So I'm going to go x equals negative b. B was 12, so I'm going to write negative, and then I'm going to write my b. What happens if b is negative? If b is negative, this becomes a positive. Okay? Plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac, but b squared minus 4ac gave us the number 0. So b squared minus 4ac doesn't have to be written. We don't have to calculate it because we already did. All over 2 times a, and earlier we said a was 12. So the quadratic formula sounds ugly, but it's really just this. Okay? And then we calculate x equals negative 12 plus or minus, what is the square root of 0? 0 over 24. And now we have to change this into 2 math problems. X equals negative 12 plus 0 over 24. X equals negative 12 minus 0 over 24. Now I want to personally admit to you, because we have a 0, we technically don't have to do that because it's a 0. Okay? But if it wasn't a 0, would we have to do that? Yes. So for notes, I'm going to do it the way we always are supposed to do it, just because I want you guys to have good habits. And then if it is a 0, you can make the appropriate adjustment. X equals negative 12 over 24. X equals negative 12 over 24. And so both of these end up giving us the same answer. X equals negative 0.5. And so, here's the deal. If your question says to solve, what would be the solve answer? The solve answer would be x equals negative 0.5. But if your question says x-intercepts, your answer must be written like this: negative 0.5 comma 0. Now, why is the y position 0 for x-intercepts? Does everybody remember what happens when you have x-intercepts on the function catalog? Y must be 0. So depending on the question, if it says solve, you write this answer. If it says x-intercepts, you have to write this answer. If you give me the wrong answer, that's going to be a small deduction. Now, one final thing. Notes are done. One final thing that I want you to know. Pull out your worksheet. If you look at your worksheet, look at the directions. The directions say solve. Do you have to do everything we just did in our notes? No. Because the directions just say solve, what do you have to do? All you have to do is just the b squared minus 4ac side. But I wanted to do everything for our notes because yesterday was our last official day. Today is our first official day of getting ready for our test. So I wanted to review everything one last final time. All right, get into your groups. Get to work.